So this session is going to run with a series of short presentations, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. I think if I've seen anything from conferences that I've worked on in the past, it is that the High Street is a very emotive subject. I think we're going to talk about it professionally in some ways today, but I think that everyone also tends to consider their own local high streets and what they mean to them. So, it's something that really goes to the heart, I think, not just of our business, but also our culture. We've entitled today's session, Optimistically, the Renaissance of the Local High Street. And obviously one of the big factors behind that is the fact that we've seen people working from home. Obviously, they're much closer to where they live in terms of the amount of time they're spending at the moment. And secondly, although I don't think anyone really knows what the model is going to be for how work goes on in the future, clearly it's going to be more flexible than it was pre-COVID. So certainly there appears to be an opportunity there for local high streets, and I think today we'll discuss some of the opportunities about how that may be pulled together. I have been asked to do a poll before we start, so I'm hoping that you guys have got the mechanism there to answer a very simple question, which is, yes, there we go. Since March this year, how regularly have you visited your local high street or town centre? More than before, less than before, or no change? So yeah, be interesting to get your views on that, and then we'll see how everyone fares. I'm suspecting that we know the answer, but it'd be interesting to see kind of what proportion we're in. Right, that's enough from me. I have a very distinguished panel to run us through everything, and I'm delighted to see one or two of them are on screen at the moment. I'm hoping we'll be joined by everyone. So we have Martin Salters from Addison Young, have Councillor Julian Bell from the London Borough of Ealing, Alex Wolfe from Romulus Huddle, Davinia Venton from Countryside, Dr. Steve Millington from the Institute of Place Management, and Louise Baxter, the Chief Executive of Harrow Bid. So really diverse group there, which I think is important for today. So I'm going to ask the panel to take over the next half an hour and give short presentations. Alex Wolfe, do we have oh yes, we have Alex Wolfe there. So Alex, if I could ask you to start, and you have 3 minutes.
Great, thanks Mark. Just wanted to touch really from a kind of office space perspective on how we're seeing that change and some of the implications that obviously has for our kind of town centres and high streets. So over the last 6 months, obviously the impact of COVID has meant that the office buildings that we own and manage in West London and frankly beyond completely emptied out. And we saw those people immediately forced to work from their homes during that period of time. And that has naturally raised some very interesting and significant questions about the future role of workplaces and the interaction between the town centres that they've historically sat within. And over the last few months, we've been doing some research into this, and there's just a couple of key points that I think are particularly revealing here that I'd like to share quickly. The first thing I'd like to share is the top thing that has been enjoyed by people most who've been working from home is that element of not commuting or travelling long distances to the office. And I think one of the things that we can see, even when we get back, hopefully, to a more normal state of affairs, is that workplaces may not return to exactly business as usual. The second thing I'd like to point out, almost kind of in a way contrasts with this, but is also equally revealing, which is that the top thing that people have least enjoyed about home working is that actually the social isolation from their colleagues and the fact they've been separated from the people that they work with. And I think these 2 points, when you look at them together, have some interesting implications for how our office spaces and town centres may change and adapt going forwards. So a kind of few suggestions and ideas that we've been kind of looking at here is that I think that we certainly won't be going back to a new normal, but we're also not going to see the death of office space at the same time. And I think that what we can expect to see in our town centres is, in the short term, there's likely to be a reduction, unfortunately, in demand for office space, partly due to the obvious huge economic impact that we're seeing right now, but also due to some of those changes in how people want workspaces going forward. So I think we'll see that those spaces become more and more about social contact with others, events and meetings, those things that can't be effectively achieved remotely, and less about desks. I think we'll see a bit more home working, given the fact that people appreciate the fact that they're not commuting, and there's been some positives there. But I also think we'll see an increase in the demand for flex space as well. But I think that raises a question in terms of what exactly that flex space will look like, and particularly where will that flex space be? Because I don't think it will necessarily be in the kind of city centre where it has really taken off, particularly over the previous couple of years. And one of the things that we've started to see, interestingly, in the last couple of months or so, is an emerging trend about the beginnings of demand for workspace. And we've seen, particularly in West London, actually, this interesting slow increase in demand for people to work in local workspaces. So in our Huddle co-working centre, for example, in Hammersmith, we've seen a demand for people who live near that centre to come in and make use of the co-working that's shown a slow uptick. And I think this could be a sign, when you contrast this to some of this kind of CBD, City of London locations, that actually there might be an increase in that demand for workplaces near where people live that they can make use of. And I think there's some really interesting implications there for West London and the boroughs within it, where we can see some of those that kind of return and workspaces begin to take places on local high streets and in local neighbourhoods.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for being very concise. That's a great start. I'm going to move straight on to Councillor Julian Bell.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk about how we're responding in Ealing to COVID and what's happening in our town centres, and how we're faring. So across the borough, generally, our town centres are doing quite well. Southall, for example, has actually seen an increase in people shopping and eating in local restaurants, and that's based on increased transactions data from a major credit card company that we kind of have known about. So there is, however, a challenge, I think, for our main metropolitan centre, Ealing Town Centre, because that's we've in the other town centres, people are working from home. They're looking to support their local shops because they're working from home and they're not in their offices. Ealing is more office based as a town centre, and the council's offices are actually significant in terms of supporting Ealing Town Centre. And as a council, we have advised, even when the government said come back on August the 1st into the office, we've actually said keep working from home, and that was shown to be a wise decision given the reversal and the new potential second wave. Stay at home if you can advise. So that's a challenge for Ealing Town Centre particularly, but and there is collateral damage, obviously. An example is Soane's Kitchen, which is part of Pitsanger Manor. Our previous provider of the restaurant there for COVID reasons has gone. But what we've done is we've looked to have pop-up opportunities and collaborations with businesses. So at the end of September, we had a couple of weekends at Pitsanger Manor with Dodo Pub, Weird Beard Brewery from Hanwell, collaborating with Soane's Kitchen to have a new pop-up dining and leisure space. We had some great weather as well, so it was terrific. Lots of businesses are creatively readapting themselves. We've got a company in Acton called Pi Skincare that have created hand sanitizer supplies and donated those supplies to NHS key workers. And there are lots of really good examples of that kind of adaptation of businesses. We as the council have looked to make our town centres safer by widening pavements to allow more social distancing, and we've also put in pop-up cycle lanes to ensure that people can cycle safely when avoiding public transport. So what do we need to do going forward? We've obviously given all of that financial aid to businesses through business rates relief, discretionary business grant scheme, etc. But we've set up an Ealing Highstreet task force of partners from across our town centres and high streets, and it includes our 3 bids that we've got in Ealing. And that task force is ensuring that businesses and local economies can operate safely with COVID. That's increasing customer confidence. Yes, they've got to make these changes with the QR codes and everything, but I've been in some of our pubs and restaurants, and it does give you that reassurance, and so people will come back if you do that. We've also got an action plan with the task force for the next 12 months to support these businesses over autumn and winter, looking at ideas such as sustainable delivery services and obviously reclaim your high street program that will include more pop-up and community-led events. We're offering free bespoke business advice services funded by the Reopening High Street Safely Fund. And just finally, quickly, I was asked about how new PDR rules, permitted development rules, impact the high street. So the changes from the 31st of August allow demolition and replacement of vacant and redundant freestanding buildings with purpose-built residential. Now, clearly, we have some powers to control that through a new condition about external appearance. But there's also, I think, challenges to our high streets through the new use class order, the new E-class, which includes many non-town centre uses. And so generally, if you add things like the old Class M use class from 2013, which allows the conversion of ground floor retail space into residential, there is a kind of cumulative danger to our town centres through those planning PDR changes. So, we need to support our high streets. They are inevitably going to have to change significantly. More leisure options, greater use of public space, making them actually more free of air pollution and making the ambience of them more pleasant, where people will want to stay. So you have to talk about pedestrianisation. But I'll finish there.
We'll get onto all of that shortly. Don't worry. Thank you very much, Councillor. Appreciate it. Very interesting. Martin, I'm going to move straight on to you, if that's okay.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I think actually building quite neatly on the some of the councillors' points there, I think one of the things I sort of want to talk about today was actually around the role of technology and how that can help deliver some of the things that the councillor has already outlined. And I think, the starting point for that is probably for the last 5-10 years at least, technology has been seen as probably the death knell of the high street. That actually, the introduction of greater e-commerce and online shopping and all of those things will mean that effectively we will never go to our town centres again, and therefore all retail is going to become extinct. And if you look at the data in terms of how online sales have increased, the UK was already had the highest penetration rate of online sales in Europe, if not the world, before COVID. If you look at what's happened in the last sort of 6 months, you'd certainly become very scared if you believe that narrative that online sales now account for about 35% of all sales in the UK. The one sector that hadn't really adopted it was the grocery sector. We've seen 80% growth in online sales in the grocery sector over the first few months of lockdown because, frankly, no one could go to the supermarket, so it's not surprising. So if you believe all of that, you suddenly think, well, our town centres and our high streets are pretty much in even deeper trouble than they were. But I don't believe that. And I think actually the point with all of this is that how do we actually harness technology to benefit the high street? And I think that works at a number of levels. I think at the strategic level, better use of data and monitoring data is critical for sort of city, town, high street planning. So we actually understand much more about how places are used, how places are accessed, getting real-time information about pedestrian flow so we can manage that relationship between cars and people. Actually, outside of commerciality, also how we manage air quality and all of the data around that. So we actually can make intelligent decisions about how we change the public realm and how we change the spaces within towns that aren't necessarily shops or restaurants, so how it becomes a better place to inhabit. So we want to go there more often. I think then as we move into the sort of more detailed scale of the high street itself, we can use it to enhance user experience. Certainly that blurring of the virtual and the real world, which has happened increasingly over the last few years, where we can, develop better applications so that we actually understand and can navigate the high street better. That's particularly important if we go into local lockdowns again, where we can safely manage how people flow around a town centre. We can disseminate information much easier in a good and for positive and negative if it's about crisis management. Then when we get into the retailers, phenomenal investment even over the last few months in sort of that online platform. So it's not just e-commerce, the Amazons of this world who have been investing in their online platforms. It is the bricks and mortar retailers as well. And that trend that already existed about the blurring of online and in-store sales increasing. So certainly that's something we see as a positive. It also changes the nature of what those businesses are doing. The growth of Uber Eats, Just Eat, and more recently probably Shop Appy, being able to allow local independent businesses to access more clients by becoming distributors of food and goods as much as they are sort of bringing people into town centres. So that action of a town centre, the things that keep those businesses vibrant, is changing because of technology. I think finally, and possibly more critically in many respects in terms of diversity, is what it means within a particular store. What we can really do with good data now, and what retailers are doing, is really personalising their product lines. So yes, you might have a Next or an H&M or whatever in every high street, every town centre across the country, but they will carry different product lines in the future because they are tailoring it to their audience. They will become more efficient stores. They will become more profitable stores because they carry the things they know their customers want. So that becomes much more pleasant as a user experience and keeps you coming back. The one other element that does allow with technology is also the relationship between landlord and tenant can change. If we can use much more electronic point of sales technology, we can understand how businesses are performing, and that allows landlords to have more confidence in changing the sort of rental structures of their space. So instead of changing a rent per square foot, you can start to have more participatory relationships, which can help make space a bit more affordable and probably more resilient, and share the pain through the crises like we've just been through, as well as share the success when trading times are better. So lots to talk about, lots to think about in how technology is it influences our high streets. I suppose the key for me is that I'm not a technologist, so I don't necessarily understand all the tech that sits behind it, but what we can see happening is really quite exciting going forward.
Excellent. Well, I'll echo that last point as well. I'm going to go straight on to Davinia, if that's okay.
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Davinia, I work for Countryside, and I just want to build actually on the point that Councillor Julian Bell made in terms of the high streets that have a lot of residential around are faring a lot better. So we are currently undergoing a number of regenerations in Bromley, South Oxon, Maidenhead and Bracknell of the town centres. And the last two are joint ventures with respective councils. And the focus is on regenerating redundant assets in the town centre, potentially car parks, and seeing the best way that we can utilise these to bring in residential, but not distract from the town centre. Each of these regenerations are different depending on the requirements of the individual towns. Now, town centres have, as everyone is saying, town centres have been evolving to compete with the internet shopping, out-of-town shopping centres and department stores. Part of this evolution is to provide more housing in the town centre. In Maidenhead, we're delivering 1,200 new homes with some ground floor retail. This will create an instant economy as the new residents will be spending in the town when they're shopping, working, going out for meals and entertaining. But what is important, so when we review a town centre regeneration, new homes should not be at the cost of what makes the town centre special and why people want to go to the town centre to begin with. They should promote and enhance the vitality of the centres. The most successful town centres are true multi-purpose hubs. And that is why when we look at new retail and adjacent to the high street and alongside the high street, we look to complement the existing uses in the town and not compete with them. Our objective is to create an 18-hour economy from breakfast through to dinner and to keep visitors and residents in the town engaged in different activities. Now, when residents living in the town, they want more than just good shops nowadays. We are now a lifestyle society. So the focus needs to be on what makes a town centre a place to go so you can socialise and have a great day out. An example of this, so at Maidenhead again, we are reconnecting the town centre to the river and providing a new public square with significantly improved public realm by the river. This will then create a destination for Maidenhead in addition to the high street. And especially in summer months where you want to dine outside, there isn't really that offer at the moment in Maidenhead. And placemaking just plays such an important part to the shopping experience. Now, I think this has also been described as well, but for a large town centre regeneration to be successful, I feel that consistent, brave leadership in decision-making and investment is needed. So historically, fragmented ownership has led to piecemeal development in town centres. And it's so important that prior to the regeneration starting, the council create a comprehensive redevelopment strategy for the town centre. Then during the delivery phase, a town centre property board should be set up to ensure all the developers are working together and implementing in accordance to the strategy. And that's the only way you get a unified town centre in the end. Now, I think it's also important to note that not all developments need a significant amount of retail. So for instance, at South Acton, and Councillor Junior Bell know this well, in Ealing, we are regenerating a council estate and increasing the density from 1,800 homes to 3,500 homes in partnership with Ealing Council and L&Q. Now, the regeneration here created a private for sale tenure in the postcode, and now there's a really diverse and dynamic community. Here, the residents spend their money in the Acton High Street and in the surrounding town centres, Ealing, Chiswick and White City. Our development provides only ancillary convenience retail and community facilities. It was never the intention to compete with the high street, rather help the local shops by building a mixed tenure community. Yeah, so I think that's about it for me, so I'll pass on.
Great, thank you very much, Davinia. All interesting stuff. I'm not sure whether we have Louise. I can't see her. Are you there? I think probably not. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Steve Merton, if that's okay.
Hi, thanks for having me. I've kind of got two hats on today. One is my IPM hat on, and the other one is my High Streets Task Force hat on. So I'll say a little bit about two things there. I agree with a lot of what the panelists have been saying so far, a lot of the issues. We kind of know what the issues are, and let's not forget the pre-existing structural changes were affecting high streets before the pandemic. So let's not forget about them. I want to bring in some evidence we've been from Manchester, where we've been working with the City Council for a number of years now on two projects, Vital and Viable Neighbourhoods, and a European Union funded project. The last few euros, we got them. So, and what we've been looking at there, well, we installed a network of 10 footfall counters in district centres across the city. So we've got data, echoing a point made earlier by Alex. We need data there, and Martin made that point. So we've got that, we've got baseline data, we've got activity patterns, and we were able to monitor the impact of the pandemic as well. And our district centres in Manchester, footfall never went below 50% of what it was last year, whereas the city centre went down to about 10%. Gives credence to the idea people were using their local centre more often, more frequently. And will they continue to do that? There's two things that come out of that project. We worked with a community in South Manchester and Withington, where we've got a community-led regeneration partnership, local traders association, and they restored the Victorian baths there, not just as a leisure centre and a bath, but as a co-working space as well. They'd already done that and been involved in small-scale iterative improvements to the district centre, pocket parks, shopfront improvements, and been doing this on micro budgets. Now there's strong capacity there to, and then they're now engaged on a much more fundamental master plan to regenerate the Withington. And what we've got there during lockdown is the traders, because they had the Traders Association, they had a social media presence, they were able to advertise the offer, they were able to work together and have proved much more resilience. They bounced back. They started setting up home delivery services, independence. So we've got a great example there of what has been done to not only think about the long-term structural changes to high streets, but also how to bounce back. And I think that's going to be important if there's a looming second lockdown and future crisis. Another example from that project is, whereas that's been very much a community-led initiative. In the north of the city, we've got a district centre, Harper Hay, where we've had strong public sector leadership. In Harper Hay, the city made a deliberate decision to invest public services to integrate the existing retail with leisure, with new education, a new police headquarters, a new sixth form college integrated with public library. And these synergies between the public sector, public services, and the existing retail and the market makes Harper Hay, even though it's one of the most deprived wards in the city, is actually our busiest district centre. And it's a valuable lesson. And if the private sector knew about this, we could get more investment into it. But that's about the power of the data. The data is very important, particularly in Withington. We're able to show them there was a mismatch between activity hours and opening hours. How many of your local traders open 9 till 5? They shut their shops when all these people come into the centre. So we did an experiment there where we had a late night opening. The traders decided to open up till 8 p.m. on a Friday evening. Some shut at 11, some shut at 12. They took record takings. Slight adjustments like that took no investment whatsoever. The lesson out of this is that, you know, not all communities have capacity to form these effective networks. This is where local public sector leadership is so important to nurture that collaboration and coordinate activity. And the problem for many local authorities, they just try and do it all themselves, and they can't. They need to work in partnership, and they need those skills. So this kind of brings me on to what the IPM have been doing recently. And this is, if people don't know, we're a membership body. We've been supporting places across the world for over a decade, but we're now leading a consortium of partners which form the National High Streets Task Force. First thing we did was quickly repurpose what that task force aims to do. We're negotiating with MHCLG to focus very much more on recovery. We immediately constructed a recovery framework and a route map to transformation. And personally, I put together some national guidance on tactical urbanism and dynamic rebalancing of streets, because we need to, yes, okay, let's widen the pavements, but do we have the capacity to put all that infrastructure back in place under second lockdown? And what are we learning from this as well? What is working? Can we make our centres more attractive, more livable, more walkable? Because we know from our own research that is what will underpin the restoration of vitality and viability to local centres. We built a repository. There's an extensive list of resources on there. And we're building data dashboards, and we plan to make about 1,000 data dashboards available to everywhere across England, so to monitor the data. And this is really important. Don't look at the national averages. As the councillor was saying, we've got data from, say, Hales Owen in the West Midlands. When the shops reopened, its footfall was 100% above, 100% higher than it was the previous year. So what's going on there? And what it all boils down to, and Davinia said this, multifunctionality. Local centres need to be more than just places for convenience, shopping and personal services. We need a range of activities. And it may mean we need different types of networks and partnerships in place. And some thorny conversations to be had with those existing. They need a refresh. New partners need building in. You know, why does the NHS build GP clinics on the edge of the estate, get them in the centre? It's planning 101, put things that people want in one place where they can all access them. So I'll put a link up on the board, and the best thing to do is people register with the High Streets Task Force and access all these free resources.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. Good advice at the end there. Louise, to conclude, if I could hand over to you.
Morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. So I work for the Harrow Town Centre Business Improvement District, or BID for short, and we support Harrow Town Centre and it's High Street. Particularly during COVID and coming out of COVID and the reopening of the town, we played a very, very key part in our town centre, and we were there all the time. We were able to help the stores reopen, make sure that they were COVID compliant, make sure they had everything they needed. We were able to sort out queues for them because we were totally blown away by how we were hit in our town centre. I did not expect what we saw, I've got to say. And it just shows you that actually people were desperate to get out coming out of COVID, and they are there to support their local town centre. I can give you some examples of 3.5 hour queue for Sports Direct. We had to triple the size of Primark, 4.5 hour queue for TK Maxx. So people were really desperate to come out, but we were there to make sure that everybody was maintaining their 2 metre social distancing. And we were able to look at the high street where the council couldn't, in what we would be able to do to keep everybody coming in. What was very clear was that people wanted to stay in the town centre. They wanted to be able to kind of sit and mingle where tables and chairs weren't allowed to be had. We brought in some pop-up parks. We put in some pop-up parks. The businesses love them. They think they're great. They add a bit of quirkiness, and people are prepared to sit down and stay and have a drink, have a coffee, mingle with their friends in a safe environment. And I think that's quite key coming out of COVID, is that what we give and what town centres give, especially at the moment, is a very safe environment where people want to come to shop and they know that they feel safe shopping.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Louise, and lots of good points there as well. We're going to do a Q&A now. I've got some questions, but also obviously if anyone out there wants to ask any of our panelist questions, then fire them through and I'll try and relay them to the group. I think one of the first things to start with, and you all touched on it in one way or another, is that firstly, the way we work is a potential opportunity for local areas. But secondly, that it's going to be a challenge to decide what each high street actually needs, because perhaps one of the issues going back in the past is that all high streets were treated equally, and yet clearly, even within West London, there are going to be very different needs for different communities. So let's start with Martin, perhaps, and just talk about what does a good high street look like in this new world, and how do we get there? Can I ask everyone to be relatively brief, just because I just want to make sure that we get through a few questions.
I suspect I'm going to say A, obvious things, and B, repeat things that have already been said. I think the problem we have with our high streets now is they're over retailed. So effectively, what high streets used to be was much more diverse. They had a whole load of civic, community, et cetera, functions. I think one of the key elements that we've lost from high streets as we had that expansion of retail through previous decades is some of that diversity. So point Steve's made, point Davinia's made, Alex as well, that diversity on the high street is critical. So workspace, community health facilities, living in the town centre. I mean, I think there are some questions we need to unpack about town centre living in every, the model you use has to differ by high street as much as it does in retail and leisure because of the different population dynamics. But certainly people living closer, with trends in convenience retail, and we do top-up shopping, not big shops, it makes perfect sense. But I think outside of the uses, it's about making sure they are more diverse, welcoming places generally. As the UK's population becomes more diverse, we see a lot of town centres which actually only cater to the needs of a certain proportion or a certain group within their wider catchment. So actually what we need to do is make sure that those facilities, for example, for some, a predominance of stand-up drinking type leisure won't work. It will exclude parts of the catchment, and particularly issues in parts of West London. So we need to make sure there are different leisure activities, family leisure, the growth in esports and things like that become quite critical. So it's about that diversity, and then it's about the quality of place. So as I sort of hinted at, understanding how the pocket parks Louise mentioned are a great example, how you break down some of those environmental obstacles, some of those physical obstacles, and also sort of, it becomes a more pleasant place to be generally. So I think you have to bring all those things together. How you do that is the $1 million question. I suspect if I knew the answer to that, I wouldn't be just sitting at AY doing strategic advice to people. I'd probably be retired somewhere already. But, it is about partnership working, and, it's an obvious answer, but it's about harnessing the best of the public sector with the skills, talents, and expertise of the private sector and the landowners and the businesses to do that together. There isn't a single solution to that, but that partnerships looks different in every high street and every town centre we work in. So that is the key to this, and I think that's ultimately about landlord and tenant all the way through to local authority highways department integrating with the shopping mall owners and all that. It's that multi-dimensional sort of partnership.
Absolutely. Alex, you talked about perhaps potentially more flexible working going forwards. So, as we all know, a lot of businesses grow up around traditional office areas. So, for example, the services and stores around the city are very different from the stores and services around Shoreditch, because they're catering for the sorts of people attracted to those sorts of businesses. What would you be looking for from a high street that surrounded a flex space that carried on attracting people to want to work there?
I think when you're talking about these local high streets and this kind of rise in demand to work near home, I think on the one side it's obviously places where a lot of people live who would otherwise be commuting and travelling into the town centres. But from the other side, and this ties back to some of the points made by the councillor, is having a really nice space which is green, which is easy for people to walk and cycle to be able to get there within a short distance of their homes, and has those local amenities. So you have your local shops, your local bars and restaurants, your local butchers and independents. And I think then there's the opportunity to create somewhere that really does have that full mixture of uses. I think one of the interesting things when you think about these high streets is they're really not all the same. So if we think about the local ones, as Martin says, that they've probably been over retailed and have a lot of residential as the opportunity to bring new users into those. And the counterpoint to that is our ones that are in city and town centres are probably under residential from that perspective and have a lot of office space. But bringing people in to live in those town centres has challenges as well. So I think really thinking about the balance of different uses is really interesting. And actually, a lot of the recent thinking and around this idea of a kind of 15-minute city that's come out of Paris, I think is really interesting to think about those balance of uses within walking or cycling distance of a specific area.
If I could go on to Davinia, thank you for that, Alex, with a sort of similar question, but I wonder whether, obviously it's only been quite recently that when you're talking about residential and what residents might want, it's only been quite recently that, COVID, work from home, flexible working has suddenly become an issue. So is that changing your thinking about some of the services and locations that you're looking at?
I think in terms of the town centres itself, I think actually working from home is obviously benefiting the town centres. And in the longer term, I feel that working practices have fundamentally changed. It's not the case that people are always going to work from home, but they're going to have the balance of working from home and from the office. So that means there will be more people in the high street in the daytime, especially if we have more residential development there. However, I think that with the high street and creating this unique offer, you don't just want people popping in for 5 minutes to go to the individual shops and then rushing home. You need to create something else to make them want to stay for an hour on their lunch break and not just go to the local Tesco and run away. So I think it's really important, this unique offering that each individual town has to have. And I think especially outside of London, where inside as well, actually, if every single high street becomes the same, where do people want to go and shop? So it's about, this is fundamental, as I said in my intro, the council deciding what they want from their high street and formulating a strategic plan that everybody then adheres to. Because otherwise it's done piecemeal.
Thank you. And that sounds like a nice segue to you, Councillor. So I wonder, I mean, you did talk in your initial presentation a little bit about, you know, the different approaches you were having for different parts of your area. I guess, you know, are you having to kind of really rethink what, you know, previous strategies because of COVID? Because clearly there are going to be a lot of changes. And I think one of the things is they all have a bit of a knock-on effect on each other.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I think that message that you know, each town centre or high street is unique in itself, and you have to have a specific you know, plan for that. It is something that we all recognise. You know, I think. Clearly what Davina's just said in terms of us having that strategic plan and kind of placemaking role as the council is critical, and you know, improving that quality of place and making our town centres places that people want to dwell in, not just have that quick pop in and out. With a key shopping item that you're getting, it is critical. So, and for me, the big thing is you know, tackling the air quality problems and tackling this challenge of you know, the car being too dominant in our town centres. We know that the car has to be part of our lives and our town centres. So, you know, let's have low emission zones where we look to have electric vehicle only streets or park only EV parking, and in that way try to make it a pleasant place to be and dwell and stay and walk to and enjoy. Because I think leisure activities are critical. I love the pop-up parks. We had a pop-up beach one summer on Ealing Green a couple of years ago, and it was terrific, you know. And so these kind of ideas, that kind of leisure element is really critical, and you know, you've got to tackle the air quality problem if you're going to have that.
Myself, thank you very much. Louise, I mean, you already just touched on a couple of things that you were doing to help support the high streets. Be interested to hear about any more thoughts you have about the sorts of things you'd like to do going forwards, and where you see maybe the quick wins and the big wins coming.
Good question. Christmas is probably our biggest next one that we're looking at, because, you know, Harrow do a switch on event every year. It pulls in 90 to 100,000 people across the whole day. It's a huge event for us. We've had to cancel that. So my businesses are now saying, well, Lou, what are we going to do? How do we do it? One of the things that we're looking at is doing things on Facebook. We've got quite a good Facebook following, going out on social, so that kind of element is still very much there. And we're looking at putting in pop-up parks that are Christmas themed. So reindeers that are benches and things like that, just to kind of pull people in. So it's kind of really about thinking outside the box and thinking how you can still pull people in, because we know that people do want to visit. We know that people do want to buy things. I think Harrow's very lucky in the mix of shops that we've got, independents, nationals, we've got a lot of leisure. So it's about having to think outside the box, and obviously Christmas is the big one that everybody is concentrating on at the moment.
No, absolutely. A lot resting on it this year, that's for sure. Steve, just to sort of conclude this question, obviously one of the things we want to avoid, as Davinia said, is clone high streets, and in fact that's where we're coming from really, and perhaps sort of preceded their demise. But by the same token, obviously, although you want individual approaches, having common platforms and not reinventing the wheel every single time you go to every single town centre, presumably that's a big part of what you're trying to look at, perhaps giving people a kit of things that they can go away and then apply to relevantly to their community.
Yeah, well, we did a lot of research on this, which included reviewing every single study that ever been on what makes a centre attractive. About 9 systematic literature review of 9,000 academic studies, and what we'd found was there's 256 things you can do, and we could walk away from that. So we built a toolkit. It's our 25 factors, which you can again get from the Highstreet Task Force website. And it's not as if the purpose of this, I think as a working locally, you've got to understand there are certain things you can do and other things you can't. I go into a lot of centres around the country, and everyone goes business rates. Well, fine. Have you got the personal mobile number of the Treasury or the Chancellor Exchequer? That's what the IPM are doing nationally with other national bodies to instill. We put in evidence for a bit, review of business rates. It's needed, but that in the meantime, you've got your shops are opening. You've got to manage that place. So much better to focus on things that can be achieved locally. Some of them are quick wins. Pocket parks, a quick win. If you can do a pocket park in 3 months, then what else could you achieve? And it's the networks and partnerships which gel around these quick wins can actually lead to more fundamental changes. Communities can't do it all themselves, though. Communities can't build infrastructure. You need local authority. You need the statutory powers of local authority involved. Local authorities need to understand they need to have a much more closer connection with their local communities. They need an old-fashioned town centre manager to walk up and down the high street and know the businesses. That's a nice little bit of resource. It wouldn't cost too much to get that intelligence. And I guess what the 25 factors ends, what we do is we take this into communities, a group of stakeholders, and it's not as if all places need to do all 25. And a lot of the things people have said are on there. Appearance, walkability, livability are all on there. And it's not as if all places need to do all 25, but there needs to be a discussion locally as to what to focus on. What does your local centre need? And come to a consensus. And it's about that process of building consensus and then working out who is best positioned to make that happen. And it's not as if the partnerships need to be a bit more fluid. Sometimes the traders might take a lead. Sometimes the local authorities might take a lead. One thing we find, though, and this is an issue, the one group of stakeholders often missing in those discussions are property owners, and that's a challenge.
Okay, you've opened up a whole new can of worms with that last point. I'm gonna ask some slightly different questions of each of you, because obviously you're all coming from different backgrounds. And I think that there's a general recognition about the fact that the vast majority of people would like their high streets to be much more vibrant and interesting places. And probably from the point of view, a lot of the people who use them, they can't really articulate what they want, but they'll know it when they see it, I suspect. Martin, you talked at the beginning in your presentation a bit about some of the technology that's coming into high streets, Shop Appy being one. There are quite a few different apps that are very location based. Tech has been seen as kind of one of the great catalysts of the demise of the high street. Where do you see it coming in where it can really help local physical retail and other services, boon and prosper?
Well, I think, and it's something Steve referred to earlier, I think it's the pace of data is as important as the data itself. Traditionally, anyone involved in the high street was relying on data that had a considerable time lag. So, survey data would take you a few months to process, and it would be, for want of a better way of putting it, it's as good as it can be, but it's still quite patchy. I think what we're getting is, whether it's Google-based data around location, point origin, and destination of shoppers, whether that sort of better tracking through online, the integration of online and physical retail sales, to know exactly what your consumers are buying, where and when. I think they're the sort of whole range of data, and that's live. And what that allows you to do is, if you're geared properly, to respond live as well. So you can change your the way that some of the movement in to and through the town centres, high streets, can operate. So if you're taking that API data that deals with movement, and similarly, if you're a retailer, you know that you're stocking, I don't know, let's make something up, a load of big, thick, woolly jumpers, and where you are, you're not selling them, but your shirts are flying off the shelves, you can recalibrate very quickly because you have all of that data. So I think data is often the key to all of how we can improve, how we can learn and improve. The other thing it allows us to do, of course, is experiment in real time. So one of the great things out of the COVID early recovery interventions like the pocket parks is you can then actually see, if you get the data monitoring framework set up at the outset, has that made any difference? Materially, has that changed the way people are using the centre, where they go, what they do when they're there? And if not, if it's having adverse effects, it is creating 20-mile tailbacks getting into your town centre, you can change that quite quickly. And I think that's what town centres need to evolve to become, is much more experimental by using that sort of data. So I think that, there's loads of other things about integrating online and in-store retail platforms. But I think the key for a whole town centre is that ability to change and adapt very quickly, providing you're looking at the right data.
Alex, I guess a lot of the kind of innovation we've seen in the workspace over the last 2 or 3 years has also been about technology and also about attitude as well. I guess someone like WeWork came along with a very different attitude compared with traditional property owners. In terms of the high street, what do you need from partners and from local authorities to help you create the kind of workspaces you feel people want in the future? And what kind of support do you need?
I think one of the interesting things and challenges around the way that this seems to be going, in terms of bringing in some workspaces into places where there haven't traditionally been workspaces before. So we've talked a lot about those local high streets. Is that it won't? I don't think the solution is doing office space as office space has been done before in those locations. You're not talking about big, long, inflexible leases to large corporates. It's a completely different audience. You're on a local high street. You're not building an office block. It's a completely different format of workspace. You're looking to build a much less corporate feeling, much more neighborhood orientated workspace that both ties into the local community and also provides them with the space that they actually want. So I think from an operator perspective, it'll be looking for operators that are more focused on local communities rather than global communities, which was WeWork's big push previously. And I think it'll be on a very different scale and building a range of those kind of local partnerships, and then using technology, as Martin said, in ways that has kind of local implications and local benefits, rather than always seeing it as a way to connect people between London, New York, and Hong Kong, seeing it as a way to connect people with all their different local shops and retailers. And I actually think it's really quite exciting, and that will be something that has a real opportunity there for all of us.
Thank you. And a sort of similar question to you, Davinia. Obviously, one of the things that marks any of the areas in the southeast out from perhaps a lot of the rest of the country is very, very strong residential demand, and hopefully that will continue despite COVID. But what do you need from others in order to kind of maximise on this change and to kind of make sure that what you want to create out of the residential is being supported by the local authorities or perhaps other business partners?
I have to say, predominantly most of our schemes that we do, especially in town centres, are in partnership with the local authority. So we normally have a very good relationship with the local authority, and we have shared objectives, which is really important, obviously. Something kind of to add on to Alex's point, though, we are now looking at a bit of a slightly different model in terms of our residential in some of the town centres. As more people are going to be working from home, and if they're living in a 1 or 2 bed flat, we all know, especially during COVID, not many people had much space. So potentially we could be having some kind of mixed office space within the block, so that in addition to the retail, and they'll have a cafe there, some of the residents can go down and actually just work from this mixed office space. It's going to be very local offering. I'm not saying it's going to be for everyone in the town centre. It's more kind of niche to the block. But I think that's really important, because during COVID, where people were just living in a 1 bed flat, they didn't have much space to work from home. So it's about seeing if this can happen. And then also it activates the high street as well. It's not going to be on the high street, this, because it's probably just back from the high street. Provide some activation, because you've got a cafe, you've got people working, and it just produces a different offering for the residents who want to live in the town centre, but are worried that actually there's no space for them to work.
Fantastic, thank you. I always feel it's slightly depressing that it's taken a pandemic for us to all start talking about things that perhaps should have been more of a priority going before a pandemic came along. We've only got 4 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask the last 3 to be very brief, if that's okay. Louise, very good points you made about Christmas as the near priority. I hate to hold a crystal ball to 2021 for a bit, but where do you see your priorities for next year, particularly in the wake of the fact that what's happened, and I guess the likelihood that the next few months we may see some ebbing and flowing in terms of lockdowns and restrictions and what people can and can't do?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we are literally taking each day as it comes. So going into 2021, we obviously want to maintain that footfall. We want to maintain our businesses, continue to support our businesses the best way we can. Unfortunately, with ever-changing rules at the moment, it's really hard to kind of be able to even plan 3 months ahead, let alone like a year down the line. So we are literally each day as it comes, but our big key thing is footfall, engaging with our local community, and just doing little local things so that we can maintain that footfall and hopefully maintain our businesses in the town.
Thank you, Louise. And Councillor, a similar question to you. I mean, again, really interesting you discussed right at the beginning about the differences between some of your local areas. So Ealing hit by people working from home, and then somewhere like Southall actually, really maybe getting a bit of a shot in the arm. So what are your thoughts about how you transport those very diverse communities going into 2021, particularly in an uncertain background, let's put it that way?
Yeah, so as just been said, we're almost kind of hand to mouth in our response to some of this. It's tough for everybody. We're not sure, any of us, where this pandemic's going, and if London has another local lockdown. Again, that's going to have a significant impact on everything that we're doing. But I think that element of giving confidence to people that our town centres are COVID safe, for me is pretty much the number one priority. And people have got to come and experience it. Using the NHS app with the QR code, and then only having table service and doing all your orders on your smartphone and everything. It's actually very efficient. It's quicker than waiting for the waiter. So I think it's great. That's using that technology is another kind of positive thing that's come out of this. So we've just got to give people confidence to come back, and that's all related to COVID safety.
Fantastic. And Steve, just to finish off, so I'm going to try and finish on a note of positivity. This session was called The Renaissance of the High Street. Do you think that through a very strange route, after so much lip service towards the High Street over the last 10, 20 years, that, you know, we may come to remember this period as a catalyst where actual genuine change started to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's something the IPM have been trying to do for 10 years. It's kind of like, there's a value to local centres, and it's, you know, it's more than the economic value. It's the social, cultural value of what our centres do. And you've got to imagine places without local centres, sprawling estates. So we want to turn all our cities into greater Los Angeles. I don't think we want that. And but we've been asking this question for 40 years, though. That's the challenge we've got. We've asked the same question. We've had various policy reviews and reports. I think my takeaways, though, would be, and the message has come through, understand what is happening locally. You know, don't listen to the national headlines, tabloids, death of the high street. Not all of them are failing before or during the COVID. Understand your local data. If anything, get a clicker for £5 and go on the high street and do your own footfall counts. And we put guidance on the task force website on how to do that. Some data is better than none. I think secondly, yes, there's short-term things, short-term adaptability and flexibility, embracing some of the new tech. The councillor was completely right. Some of the bars in Manchester now have these apps, which is much better. Why didn't they always have these apps? You know, what stopped them from doing it last year? You know, and that, you know, that helps with the adaptability. But also, don't take your eye off the long-term structural change. This future adaptability resilience. Our high streets were changing anyway. And the shift to online has been accelerated. We've still got out-of-town retail, which was the big killer to our high streets. Let's face it. Before, you know, most trade, 25% footfall had gone to out-of-town before the internet. So let's not forget that. But, you know, it is about partnerships. It's about building networks. It's about building consensus, and we perhaps need new skill sets within places to do that. And that's what the task force has been set up to do over the next 4 years, is to support places in achieving that and plan for the future.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was suitably upbeat. Thank you very much for fulfilling the brief, Steve. Appreciate it. I mean, I think the one interesting thing I'll say to conclude before I hand over to Ross to take on the next sessions is that, you know, it always seemed to me, and I come from a retail background, that whenever people talked about the renaissance of the high street, they just were talking about filling the old shops up with new shops, and that was never going to happen. I think we're finally having these joined up discussions about actually high streets being something very different going forwards, you know, and hopefully better and serving their communities better. So on behalf of the organisers and all the people that have been tuning in, I thank the panel very much. And it's now my turn to hand over to Ross to tell everyone how they go on to the next session. Thank you, guys. Thank you.